Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar briefing session. We're going to discuss the latest updates to the Tier 4 visa rules covering migrants coming to the UK to study. And the new rules came into force earlier in the month on the 6th of April, and this is a session for internal Into staff only. So here's what we're going to cover during the session. We'll start with a brief overview, an executive summary, if you like, of the changes before going into each one in a bit more detail. There have been some changes concerning under 18 applicants, changes for those students who are sponsored by their government, and there have been changes for students funding their studies with educational loans, and there's also changes for those who are applying for further leave on Tier 4 from within the UK. Then we'll briefly go through some of the smaller or less impactful changes at the end. Once I've talked about all the changes, there'll be time for questions. These could be about the new changes or any other questions or concerns you have regarding visa compliance. You can submit a question using the questions section of the webinar client, or if you prefer, I can unmute your microphone if you'd prefer not to type your question. So as I say, here's a really brief breakdown of the main changes that have been made to the Tier 4 rules. Tier 4 applicants under the age of 18 must now provide evidence of their relationship with whoever consents to their UK study. All Tier 4 applicants over the age of 16 are now subject to the genuine student rules. Sponsored Tier 4 applicants need written permission to be in the UK from their sponsor. For students extending their Tier 4 stay from within the UK, any new course must start no more than 28 days after their previous visa expires, and educational loan funds can be dispersed directly to the education establishment where a Tier 4 applicant will be studying. So that's a one-sentence summary of all the things we're going to go into in more detail now. So there have actually been two separate changes concerning students under the age of 18 during this raft of changes. There are new documentary requirements at the application submission stage for those under the age of 18, and all applicants over the age of 16 are now encompassed by the requirement to prove they are genuine. So in terms of the new evidential requirements required when a Tier 4 applicant under the age of 18 submits their Tier 4 visa application, this ties into the fact that these applicants have always needed to provide a letter of consent with their applications, confirming that their parents or legal guardian is happy for them to study and live independently in the UK. This change basically now asks for proof that the person or people giving that consent is related to the applicant and therefore qualified to give that consent. The best document to use for this purpose is the full version of the applicant's birth certificate, so that's the one that lists the name of the parents as well as the name of the person being born. If the student has a legal guardian, proof that this guardianship has been ratified legally needs to be submitted, so that needs to be something that's gone through a court-approved legal guardianship document. This change is actually a similar requirement to those already in place if a Tier 4 applicant is using a parent or guardian's funds to pay for their UK study. The documentary evidence required is exactly the same. The other change involving under 18 students is that UKVI have now clarified that any Tier 4 applicant over the age of 16 is now subject to the genuine student rule as part of their application. This has previously only applied to those applicants over the age of 18 and basically means that for applicants over the age of 16, including those applying for a Tier 4 child visa, anyone could, in theory, be asked to attend a credibility interview and have to convince an entry clearance officer that they are genuinely coming to the UK to study and not for some other reason. Obviously, we Into don't have license to sponsor students on a Tier 4 child visa, but this is relevant for us because it could lead to more cases of students applying to study with us with previous credibility refusals in their immigration history, which obviously then complicates their sort of ability to study going forward as well. One of the changes that UKVI announced is that all Tier 4 applicants financially sponsored by their government or an international sponsorship agency at the point they apply for their Tier 4 visa or in the 12 months preceding it must have written consent from their sponsor for their stay in the UK. So this is something where I think there's been a bit of confusion in market since this announcement, but it's actually simpler than it sounds. So obviously Tier 4 applicants that are sponsored by their government currently have to provide a financial guarantee letter that confirms this, both to us during the application to INTO and also to UKVI when they apply for their visa. That will continue to be fine to use. There's no change necessary there. Where this may constitute a change is for any students who have previously, so within the last 12 months, been sponsored by their government, but who are not being financially sponsored at the point that they apply for their latest Tier 4 visa. So someone who's previously been financially sponsored within the last 12 months, but at the point they're applying with us or for their most recent visa, they're no longer being financially sponsored by that government. So these students, under the new rule, will have to submit a letter from their previous sponsor confirming their consent to their continued stay in the UK for study purposes. And I think presumably this change has been made to ensure that students adhere to any agreement that they have to return to their home country or to undertake any work for the government or any other company as part of the conditions of the sponsorship they receive from their government. It's now possible for those students financing their UK study via an educational loan, to have these funds dispersed directly to the educational establishment they will be studying with, as opposed to their own bank account. UKVI have clarified that they view this as sufficiently secure to prove that a student has the means to fund their UK study. This is clearly something that UKVI have been asked about previously if it wasn't actively being sought by certain education providers. It may end up being seen as a more secure way of demonstrating an applicant's ability to fund their studies if these funds are being held directly by their sponsor, particularly if the applicant is from a country which is viewed as high risk by UKVI, particularly on financial grounds. The next change is something that was actually removed from Tier 4 rules in a previous update in 2016, only to be reintroduced now. It's important to note that this rule only affects those Tier 4 applicants who remain in the UK between their original visa expiring and any new course starting, so those who extend their stay from within the UK. So in those circumstances, there can only be a maximum period of 28 days between an applicant's current visa expiring and their new course starting. So for example, if a student's visa expires on the 30th of September, they would need to be applying for a course which began before the 28th of October in order to be able to apply to extend their stay from within the UK. It's likely that this change has been made to stop students from potentially being able to spend periods of up to several months between courses, as long as they submit their visa applications before their current Tier 4 visa leave expires. And obviously there's nothing really inherently wrong with doing that, but UKVI's view is that people on Tier 4 visas are meant to be here studying, not for any other reason, so that's likely they're going to be their sort of reason for putting that back in. And that's it in terms of all of them, the main changes. There have been some other smaller changes. UKVI have clarified that a working week runs from Monday to Sunday, and that may sound pretty obvious, but I think they've put that in because some clever lawyers may have been trying to argue that weekend work or work outside, office hours may not have, should not have been considered work for the purposes of figuring out how much work a Tier 4 student had done against their allowance. UKVI have also sort of confirmed that the acceptable period of overstaying has been reduced from 28 days to 14 days. So that means a student is still able to apply for a new visa even after a period of overstaying their previous visa up to 14 days, but for any period of overstaying longer than that, they'll have problems. Obviously, we don't want any students to overstay at all, but there is that period of leeway given there by UKVI for kind of extreme cases. There has been, and I've had at least one question about this from someone saying, the cap for study at below degree level has been increased to 3 years. And it has, but it's only been increased to 3 years for those students who are studying courses taught at sea that are being organised by the Maritime Agency. We don't have any courses that fit those requirements, unfortunately, and we don't have any courses taught at sea at the moment. So for our purposes, the cap for study at below degree level is still 2 years. There's been no change there. And then finally, UKVI have confirmed that the UK NARIC equivalency requirements, so for those students who are using as their basis for the evidence that they can speak English to the correct level, the fact that they've done a degree level qualification in an English language speaking country, that doesn't affect an HEI's ability to assess a student's English language level, where that is what the student is using as their proof of that. And that's all the smaller changes as well. So that's everything I was going to say on the changes. I think there's already been some questions already, so I'm happy to take any more questions. Obviously, if you'd rather not have your question answered here, or if you don't think of your question in time while we're doing this session, obviously send any questions you have to us to tier4questions@intoglobal.com as normal. If you've got any questions, or if you have any students who have any questions about IELTS or English language qualifications at all, send those to celt.help@intoglobal.com. Yes, like I say, you can either ask your questions using the questions sort of subsection of the webinar client, or if you would prefer, I can unmute your microphone and you can actually ask it to us all here. So I'll just go through a few of these that have already come in. So Tua's question about proof of relationship. I understand that this is best done by providing birth certificates of both parents and student. Is that correct, or is there another acceptable way to prove relationship? You don't actually need to provide, don't necessarily need to provide both, as long as the student's birth certificate has the parents listed on it. That's the best sort of evidence you can use. So in some countries, and in the UK as well, you can get what's called a full version of a birth certificate and a short version. So we're talking about the full version here, where the birth of the child is recorded, but it also records the names of the mother and the father. So that's all that's required, as long as there's a document that links the applicant and the parents as definitively being related. That's all we're talking about. If they don't have that, they probably need to look at something else to ratify that, and depending on the country the student is from, it may cause smaller or larger problems. You could get something like a court-sworn document confirming that you are the student's parent, or it's possible that you can get birth certificates that have been produced after the fact, but we would probably then have to provide a contextual letter confirming why a student who was born 18 years ago only had their birth certificate sort of issued, 5 weeks ago, or whatever the situation is. And Mila asks, how should the consent letter from the parent look? Is there some particular form that or text that it should include? So the consent letter has always been a requirement for under 18 students. And I think quite often with Into students, we've used the fact that we have to get them to sign a consent letter to kind of, we've told them to submit that with their application. It doesn't need to be any particular form. All it really needs to say is that whoever is giving the consent is qualified to give it, so they're the mother, the father, or the legal guardian. And obviously now there's those new documentary requirements as well that need to be included. And yes, it needs to say, I'm the student's parent, I'm happy for them to come to the UK to study and live independently whilst in the UK. That's the only formulation there needs to kind of be for the consent letter. So like I say, the consent letter hasn't really changed. The change is that you need to provide the birth certificate to sort of back the consent letter up. So we don't. So Tu's asked a similar sort of question. We don't have a suggested wording or a consent letter format, but what I can do is we can mock one up and send one on. But like I say, it's very simple formulation, and it just needs to talk about them being the student's parent and them consenting to their UK study. And I guess, the more detailed it can be about where they're studying and dates and that sort of thing is all to the good, but it doesn't need to be any more detailed than that. What I'll do is I'll get an under 18 parental consent letter mocked up, and we'll get that sent around to everyone shortly. Hopefully that's helped with those two questions. Are there any more questions? Maybe if there's anything other than the new changes, or maybe that everyone's happy with the new changes. Okay, well that was a nice swift session. That's great. Hopefully they're all going to be like that. Okay, well I hope you found that useful. Like I say, what I'll do is I'll send around the PowerPoint slide if you want to send that round to any colleagues. I've also been recording the webinar, so everyone can have the pleasure of listening to my voice in their own time as well if they want to. And that will be sent round shortly as well. Obviously, I've already sent round the update document. If you have any more questions that you think about outside of the session, feel free to send them to me, either to my personal address or to Peter or to Tier 4 Questions, and we'll get those sorted out for you as soon as we can. But it's not that big an update at the moment. There's a few things in there, but it's not. It shouldn't be too earth-shattering, hopefully. But any questions you do have, please send them over to the normal sort of outlets, and we'll get them sorted out as soon as we can. So I hope you found that useful. Thanks very much. See you next time.